Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. I'm Marc-Antoine Godin with Arp and Basu by my side in another place. And we're Friday, September 19th. Arpin, things have gotten underway in Brossard. Physical testings for the Canadiens, first on ice practice, a scrimmage also. So it's exciting because there's finally a little bit of meat around the bone.
Yes, there's content. There's actual information to talk about and not just sort of speculation and innuendo. There's actual information. So we did have, historically under Martin St. Louis, coaches like to say don't read too much into the line combinations. With Martin St. Louis, you can absolutely read too much into the line combinations on day one. So we're going to get into that because we saw them on Thursday. On their first on ice day. So we will get into that. But first, Thursday, the first day was significant because we spoke to Kirby Dach, we spoke to Patrick Laine. Martin St. Louis talked about both of them the day prior on Wednesday, confirming that Dach was going to start the season as a second line center, saying that we might see the best version of Patrick Laine just because of how much his circumstances have changed going into the season. So it was good to hear from both of them because they both have similar stories to tell, right? And they both have similar challenges that they've overcome physically and in Laine's case mentally also. But it's, after hearing both of them talk on Thursday, what became pretty clear is that they've both done everything in their power to make this season a success. And that's a real good sign for the Canadiens. It's a good sign because it means Patrick Laine is re-energized about his hockey career and spoke yesterday about how much he loves the organization here, how much a family feeling it has, and how he'd like to continue his career. Now that's very premature. He's going to have a lot of he's going to have to prove a lot on the ice in order for that to even be a conversation. But that's the commonality of these two guys who are big, talented, potential impact players in the NHL who have been derailed for one reason or another in both cases are now reunited on the same line, which we've talked about on this podcast already, how that was basically, not disaster might be a strong word, but did not seem ideal last season. They're there with the crown jewel, the new crown jewel of the Canadiens empire, I guess, with Ivan Demidov playing on the wing with them. So I thought it was very interesting to hear from them, and I thought in both cases we got an admission of something. Kirby Dach talked about at one point he was asked, what's it been like to deal with this challenge again? And he got really philosophical. He's like, I didn't see it as a challenge. I saw it as an opportunity to right some wrongs. And basically didn't really sugarcoat he didn't say it blatantly, but basically gave a very strong suggestion that his offseason last year, he did not do everything in his power to come into camp and really get off to a great start, which was kind of, we heard some rumblings about that over the course of the season last year. No one coming flat out and saying it, but it seemed to be in the air that maybe Kirby Dach did not show up to training camp in the best of shape or really having done everything in his power to be ready for that camp. Well, doesn't sound like that's the case this year. And in Laine's case, he kind of admitted that, at certain points of the season, he just felt like he didn't have his legs. He made reference to the fact that, it's good to have the legs feel good. And when your legs feel good, you can actually move and make a play rather than just stopping and looking to make a pass because you don't have your legs. So in both cases, and in Laine's case, I don't think that's his fault really. He had no preparation for last season. So that was just his reality. But, both guys kind of giving explanations of why their season went the way it did. But of the two, the bigger admission was Dach, who kind of flat out said that I didn't have the commitment necessary last summer, but this summer I changed that.
Yeah, he used the expression rehabbing with a purpose.
Yes.
So it's interesting. So it's an admission in a way that last year he didn't necessarily do everything on and off the ice to make sure that he'd be ready. So when you mention it's a similar story that the two of them tell, it's how different their summer of 25 is compared to 2024 and what can be the impact on the Montreal Canadiens right from the get-go. Because yes, it's true that their combination, the two of them as line mates, was far than optimal last season. But Laine said the best version of me skates. The best version of me moves his feet. And he mentioned that first, even before saying, I find my spots and I score goals, which obviously is part of his game. But for him, being at the top of his game, first and foremost, it means that he's going to be skating, which was not really the case last year. It was lacking. It was
definitely lacking, yes.
And with Dach, who was not exactly a sprinter last year either, it made for a line that was that was not playing fast and that was not moving fast enough, at least. So I think that it's definitely an interesting admission from Dach, but also I think that for Laine, I'm very surprised, very curious to see what can be the difference when you have a guy who's got 2 sessions on the ice prior to a training camp in 2024 versus him being on the ice regularly since May. For a player of that caliber, it makes a world of difference. So I buy it. When he says that we're going to see the best version of him, I buy him. I buy it. It's not that I fully trust Patrik Laine. I'm so like, oh my God, yeah. I will, I guess I will forever be a doubter to a certain extent, but I'm willing to give it a chance because the guy is too talented, and now all the pieces seem to be aligned for him to have the sort of season that he wants, that he craves.
What I buy more is that last season he performed under very difficult circumstances. Not only did he only skate twice before training camp, obviously he got hurt in his second preseason game, so the fact that this guy scored 20 goals is remarkable, because really he was not prepared to play that season. It was not a proper preparation for an NHL player to play an NHL season. And so, I look back at it and I believe, I forget what the number, the Canadiens had lost 4 or 5 games when he came into the lineup. Like the Canadiens were in, the season was slipping away when he came back. And he really did he was one of the players, with Jakub Dobeš being another and Alex Carrier being another. There were all these moments in the season where a player just came and gave a little energy boost at the right time. He obviously was one of them, and he just went on a scoring spree as soon as he came back. But, sustaining that over the long haul, I think we saw it slowly deteriorate over the course of the season. And it was to be expected. And it was hard to remember that because at the time, like when he looked bad, he looked really bad, it was hard to keep it in context and keep it in perspective how this guy entered the season. Forget, putting aside the mental hurdles that he had to go through, and everything, like sort of the life altering moments he had considering retirement at age 25 and all this stuff. Really heavy things, and where he just did not like playing hockey. So all that seems behind him. So now I do believe we'll get the best version of Patrik Laine. I just still wonder, what does that version look like? What is the best version of Patrik Laine, and how effective is that version? Now, he's a supremely talented player, and if his best version is able to sustain some degree of 5-on-5 play and not be a drag on his line, which I don't think he will be, but he was last year towards the end for sure. So, and it became a situation where they had to find a way to keep him in the lineup so they can get him on the power play, and then he stopped scoring on the power play. So then at the moment he got hurt in the playoffs, it was kind of like, it kind of helped them, because they didn't have to fit him in somewhere awkwardly on some line just to get him on the power play. So, but he was in very good spirits today. cracking jokes. He didn't like the order in which I asked him about the opportunity to play with Demidov. He quickly corrected me that he has the opportunity to play with me. I'm in my 10th year.
But he made sure that it was a joke, though. He says, don't run with a headline.
Don't make a big deal about it. Exactly. But it's, I wanted to tell him you're allowed to make jokes, but I figured I'd leave it. I'd already put my foot in my mouth at that point. I figured I'd just shut up. So, but yeah, he was in good spirits. He was talking about his summer, how much he enjoyed the city, everything it has to offer, how the traffic sucks, but that's his only complaint. It was very lighthearted. And Dach was actually almost the opposite of that. Dach is never thrilled to be talking to us, but he was very, obviously he said a lot of significant things, but as Dach was talking, I'm like, this guy has to have the biggest chip on his shoulder right now. Could you imagine being Kirby Dach and listening to the discourse around your hockey team all summer? What are you going to do about the second line center? We don't have a 2C. How could you enter the season without a 2C? How could you not have gotten a 2C, 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 2C? All from the moment the season stopped right up till the golf tournament. 2C was the number one talking point on this team. Who is going to be the new 2C? I went to my son's school year opening barbecue recently. I walk in the door and someone comes right up to me. He's like, what are they going to do about the 2C? It's the first thing that someone said to me. I was like, I don't know. I know as much as you do right now. And so this whole time, Kirby Dach's putting 3-4 hours a day in the gym in somewhere in the Edmonton area. You don't think that drove him a little bit? Like, you do have a 2C. I'm right here. Hey, hi there. I can hear you. I can hear you guys talking. Like, I'm right here, And so I think he's a heavily motivated guy, and he didn't, he wasn't like being combative or being like, but you definitely got the sense that he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder and is fully cognizant of the fact that he has something to prove and he has an opportunity to prove it because the Canadiens didn't get that 2C. They are coming back. The incumbent is getting his job back because they did not acquire it externally. So he has the opportunity, and he has done everything he can to take full advantage of that opportunity, as opposed to a year ago when, from the sounds of it, based on what he himself said, he did not do that.
Well, it's not too late in his career to, to go out there and prove people wrong. The first thing that he needs to do is stay healthy. And even though he's been injury prone in the first 5 or 6 years of his professional career, he can still become a healthy player. You don't have to be injury prone your whole career. You have guys.
Look at Sid.
Exactly. Or Daniel Alfredson.
Andrei Markov.
Yeah, that's well.
I mean, that was later in his career, but I mean, no one thought he was going to play effective hockey again because he kept hurting his knees.
That's right.
And then he managed to become Andrei Markov again and finished his career on a high note until he got into a spat with Marc Bergevin. But still, it's as a player, he became the player he once was when no one thought he had any chance of doing that because his knees were so banged up.
But if Dach is healthy, I still totally trust the fact that he can be that player. It's just he needs to be healthy enough to show it. Now, he
has to be driven enough to show it.
Yeah.
I think that was part of the problem last year.
Yeah. Well, the drive seems to be there enough that his teammate Kaiden Guhle said that he was proud of Kirby Dach.
Yeah.
Proud of the work that he put in the
and his first answer was, I think he learned how hard it is.
Yeah.
Which was kind of telling, I think unintentionally he was kind of like, this guy gets it now. It's hard. You got to work hard. You got to show up. You got to go to work. You might not be feeling great. You got to put in the work, and he did that, which again subtly suggested that maybe that wasn't always the case in the past.
Okay, so I want you to maybe clarify something if you can in regards to his health. So they're going to take it easy. They want to make sure that he's gradually back into action. The hope for him being that he's going to be ready to play the first game on October 8th. The expectation to a certain extent from management is that he is going to be ready. But in the meantime, how many scrimmages is he going to take part in? How many preseason games? Because it seems to be like the physical requirements of a scrimmage are not the same than facing, obviously, an opponent from a different organization. What do you think it's going to look like in terms of games that he might play during preseason?
Well, I mean, I can't see him playing in a regular season game without having played a single preseason game. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. If you're afraid to put him in a preseason game, how can you be assured that to put him in a regular season game? That doesn't make any sense. He's been scrimmaging for weeks. I mean, they've been doing regular scrimmages in Brossard. The scrimmage on Thursday, actually, he didn't take part in the scrimmage on Thursday. He was in the group that didn't scrimmage, but did a full practice with that group. I don't know. Will we see him scrimmage later today? We're recording this on Thursday evening, but it's should be out. You should have this available to you Friday morning, so we don't know what happened on Friday at training camp. But he made reference to a plan that he was going to keep secret. I asked him, "Do you anticipate playing in preseason games?" He's like, "We're going to do what the plan calls for." But again, he has scrimmaged. He was a full participant in practice on Thursday. I can't. There's absolutely no way, as far as I'm concerned, that he would start the regular season opener without having played a single preseason game. So yeah, I just think he's not gonna. Maybe he won't play the initial run of preseason games. I could see that. Next week they have 3 preseason games: Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. These are going to be games with a high percentage of players who are not going to play in the NHL this year. This is exactly the kind of game Patrik Laine got hurt in last year by a player who is not going to play in the NHL. So I could see them skipping those games for him. And then later on in camp, when there's more of an NHL vibe to the rosters, putting him in one of those games. I could see that being a part of managing his injury and managing some risk, frankly. I mean, what probably frustrated the Canadian, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine what a big part of the frustration for the Canadiens with the Laine situation last year is that he got hurt against an AHL guy, a guy trying to prove his NHL worthiness by hitting the highest profile guy on the ice and missing because he's an AHL guy. So it's just like, and there's no malicious intent there. Like, I know Cedric Parry took a lot of heat and a lot of crap from Canadiens fans, but he didn't go out trying to hurt Patrik Laine. He just missed his hit because he's not talented enough to catch an NHL guy the way he would have liked to. And so I think avoiding that kind of, frankly, for both of them, for Dach and Laine, avoiding that environment, the Canadiens have a minimum number of NHL guys they have to dress. I wouldn't be the least bit shocked if neither Dach nor Laine were one of those NHL guys, at least not Monday and Tuesday. And then, I mean, Laine probably wouldn't. That's the Leafs on Thursday, which is the team he was playing when he got hurt. So it wouldn't shock me if those guys just kind of skipped the first week and went straight to like sort of the more NHL-y part of training camp in the second week. As far as
in the second week, the Canadiens will face the Ottawa Senators in Quebec City on September 30th. That's a Tuesday, and then they stay in Quebec City for a few days, and then they come back to the Bell Center against those same Senators on the Saturday. So that gives that would be an interesting window for Dach to play a first game, see how his knee reacts after like a full-on competition, play another game on the Saturday, and then he gets another 3 days off before opening night in Toronto. So
that would make sense to me. Anyhow, we'll talk about that at the end. But this this is very relevant to something Martin St. Louis said on Wednesday. We're gonna close with this, but just as a teaser, the Canadiens also finished training camp last year with back-to-back games against the Ottawa Senators, and we will talk about that in a moment. But now I think it's as I mentioned, the first day of training camp under Martin St. Louis has traditionally been very revealing in the sense that he doesn't play games. He doesn't mishmash lines. He doesn't put AHL guys with NHL guys or junior guys with NHL guys. He generally comes out with the lines that he's hoping to start the season with, that he thinks or has considered over the summer with his staff, and he's come up with these combinations. And if they work, and if there's chemistry shown, and if there's and if the player himself shows an ability to maintain that role, then it won't change, right? And so, we saw, Caulfield, Suzuki, and Slavkovsky were a line. As expected, Anderson, Evans, and Gallagher were aligned. But other than that, forward wise, we weren't sure what they were going to do. So ultimately, he landed on Laine, Dach, and Demidov. And perhaps more interestingly, landed on Bolduc, Alex Newhook, and Owen Beck. Which to me, Owen Beck being on that line was probably the biggest surprise of the first day of camp. Was really a nice feather in that kid's cap. He had a good, not a great, but a very good rookie tournament, like prospect event. Physical, fast, got a lot of good scoring chances, responsible, and just generally showed, and Pascal Vincent, I think, after the first game, he said, I think tonight we got a preview of what Owen Beck's going to look like in the NHL. And little did we know that less than a week later, he was going to be on an NHL line while Joshua Roy was playing on a line with Alex Belzile and Vincent Rohr. A year ago at this time, Joshua Roy was on an NHL line. And Joshua Roy was the guy where on the first day of camp, we're like, oh, this is a nice opportunity for Joshua Roy. He's really got to seize it, and he didn't. So Owen Beck has to seize this because this is a very, very, very nice vote of confidence for him. And just quickly before I'll hand the ball off in a second, I promise. But last week I had an interesting conversation with Beck during rookie camp, and he talked about when he got sent back to Laval. The Canadiens were in Vancouver, and so he had played. We had actually spoken to him in Calgary, and he wasn't playing all that well. He wasn't very effective, and so the team flew to Vancouver. And when they got to Vancouver, they actually sent Beck to Laval, and they called up Joshua Roy. And so he said that he sat down and had a long conversation with Martin St. Louis at that time. Now, I don't know how these usually go, but I don't think it's all that common for the coach to have like a long sit down with a guy when he gets sent back. But he did in this case, and maybe he does all the time. I don't know. It's possible. But in this case, he did. And he talked to Beck and he said, I just felt like you were itching for offense too much. He wanted to get that first goal. He wanted to get that first point, and it was affecting the things that he does well, the details in his game, the responsibility, stuff like that. He's like, you got to focus on the other things, and then the offense will come. And Beck said he really took that to heart. And when he got back to Laval, that's what he did. He stopped chasing offense, he called it. And so he really dialed in on the details of his game. But to me, that conversation was an indication of how much St. Louis was invested in this kid. Like he liked things that he saw in Beck enough to have that conversation with him and to give him the guidance necessary. So now he shows up at camp. He was obviously watched throughout rookie camp and through the rookie tournament and earned that assignment on the first day. Now, listen, this could last a day. This could last 5 days. This could last whatever. His name is not written in marker, but it's a pretty good sign for Owen Beck that his NHL future might be arriving pretty quickly.
Yeah. So one of the first things that jumped in when I saw that jumped to me is that the rookie camp must have meant something. Where you had a guy in Oliver Kapanen who was also there and was a direct competitor to Beck for that same spot. So who's going to get first crack? Probably the one of the two who looked the best out there in their evaluation. It's possible. The other thing is that those two guys have an advantage on that line over Joe Veleno and Samuel Blais. And it's ironic with the Montreal Canadiens, they're righties. And on that line, you have Bolduc and Newhook, who are both lefties, and Martin St. Louis loves to have two guys who can take faceoffs, each on their strong side. So ideally, you would like to complement them with a righty. So that's where, yes, the rookie who performed the best. You could say also, yes, the guy who's an homegrown talent, the guy who's growing up with us, who knows our system, we know them, we trust them, so they might have first crack before a guy that we just signed. That's possible. There's no reason why Veleno or Blais should feel entitled that that job is necessarily there. They're coming on on very affordable contracts, both of them. So I think that the fact that he's given a chance, and you're right, we don't know how long it's going to last, but the fact that the righties in a lineup that's otherwise is so full of righties, but on that particular line, it helps. And we know also how he's been groomed as a winger more and more as the season and especially the playoffs went on in Laval last year. Now he's in an opportunity where that versatility he can showcase it. So it's up to him to not drop the ball.
Yeah, and I would say the other advantage that Beck has is that between the two, I think he's seen as a better faceoff guy.
Mm-hmm.
And what that line will need is possession. And so, because
Newhook is not strong in the faceoff. So if you have someone who can win you some faceoffs, it's tough to win faceoffs as a rookie in the NHL. There's no doubt about it. But over a full season, let's exaggerate. But if they were to spend the season together, I would suspect that Beck would have a better percentage than Newhook would.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, we didn't see Joe Veleno slotted into an NHL line. I wasn't paying attention that much attention during the Group A practice. He was Veleno and Blais were in Group A. I don't know who they were skating with, but the issue for Martin St. Louis is if there's a D zone draw on the left side, who's he sending out? There's Evans can win or draw on the left side, but it's not ideal. He's got to send someone out to take that draw that Dvorak always took, and it's like, it was comforting as a coach to have a guy like Dvorak when you have a D zone draw on the left side and be like, okay, go out and win us a draw. And more often than not, he did that. He's not going to have that. So yes, having someone to win draws on Newhook's line would be important, but someone's going to have to take that draw. And it's going to be either Newhook or Veleno if Veleno's in the lineup. And frankly, this is what gives Veleno a good shot of being in the lineup, is that you need someone to win that faceoff. And Veleno did not have a great faceoff percentage last year, but one thing I was told is that, and you can't find these metrics, but the Canadiens have their own data, and they found that his defensive zone left side draws was, well above 50%. He won the majority of his defensive zone left side draws, Joe Veleno, and it was a factor in them signing him because they knew that they'd lost Dvorak.
You'd still have Evans, Gallagher, and Anderson, three righties on the same line, and then on your other line, Bolduc, Newhook, and Veleno, three lefties.
No, I'm not saying that. I don't know how Veleno would get into this lineup, but
no, that's the thing.
I don't know, but if he does, this is why.
Yeah.
Like, he'll get in. Like, I could see them keeping him out of camp and making him the 13th forward. And if this becomes a chronic issue that is glaring, then he gets into the lineup. And maybe it's to the detriment of Beck and they move Newhook to a wing. Maybe they move Newhook to a wing on another line. I don't know. It's not clear how Joe Veleno would crack the lineup, barring injury, obviously, other than this becoming something that really starts driving Martin St. Louis crazy. And so, if they start giving up goals off lost draws on the left side in their own end, it's going to have to be addressed. So, but anyhow, in the meantime, and again, we'll see how it evolves, but I think the day one on a session is very telling of all the work the coaching staff put into preparing training camp. They don't just do it. Nothing is done randomly. For instance, the starting D pair in the scrimmage was Arbor Jacki and Alex Carrier. That's a decision. They didn't just go out there and since they were the first ones out there, they get to start. No, they were told you're starting. So to me, that's a tell that maybe. And Jacky, by the way, looked fantastic in the scrimmage. Was really good, moving the puck, smart passes, anticipating play. It's a scrimmage, nothing to get too crazy over, but he looked really good. But I found it interesting that to start the game, they had all their NHL guys on the ice: Matheson, Dobson, the Suzuki line. They had the I can't remember if it was the Evans or the Newhook line, but it was another NHL line. I think it was the Evans line. And then you had Jacky and Carrier. And where you all of these things, all of these decisions are made. Like they're decisions that are made, and they're not made willy-nilly for no reason. So so I found that interesting. But yeah, it's so that's why Beck being on that line is significant. It's not just like, oh, whatever, let's just throw him there for now, we'll figure it out later. No, they've had weeks to think about this, and they have thought about it, and that's where he started camp.
He's also someone who could kill penalties if need be, which is another matter that needs fixing or reinvention.
As is Newhook. And
yes.
If they're playing on the same line anyway, that's very helpful if they are a penalty killing pair.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it's funny because they might be slotted fourth, but I would suspect that between them and the Evans line, if those lines were to remain intact, whether it's Beck or somebody else, but let's call it the Bolduc Newhook line and the Evans line, all in all, 5-on-5, I would expect them to have roughly the same number of minutes. There's not going to be like a line that's typically the fourth line. I would be very surprised if they acquired Zachary Bolduc being so big on the kid and then reduce his ice time to 10 or 11 minutes a night. So I think that there's going to be an interesting balance in players' usage 5-on-5, and you look also between the guys who play power play and the guys who play PK, you can spread almost everybody apart, maybe from Gallagher. But everybody else is likely to play on one special team or another. And even then, Gallagher could end up on PP2. So
Gallagher could also end up on the PK. I remember talking to him at the end of last season about it, and he told us that story about when he jumped on by mistake and he scored a shorthanded goal with Michel Therrien. Yeah, that was like the last time he killed a penalty. But like he just jumped on by mistake, and then he just didn't come back and wound up scoring a shorthanded goal. I think it was in Washington. Anyhow, but he was saying at the time that, that's something that, as I get older and as I go on in my career, I need to start adding tools to my toolbox. And that's one that he thinks could be of interest to him. And frankly, there's lots of candidates. I think Bolduc could kill penalties at some point.
Yeah.
But if he's on the power play, which he definitely will be and should be, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the way I see it is that Dach line's going to get like heavy ozone deployment. That Evans line is going to get heavy D zone deployment. And so then you have the Suzuki and the Newhook lines, that are Suzuki's going to lean offensive, but not strictly be that. So I imagine Newhook's line will naturally have to lean defensive and not strictly be that, because for sure, barring an icing, Marty is not going to send Kirby Dach out for a defensive zone draw with Patrick Laine and a rookie. It's just not going to happen, right? So that is like an offensive zone deployment situation, and Evans is obviously going to be heavily used in the defensive zone. So you have these two other lines, and it would be ridiculous to have Nick Suzuki's line start the majority of their shifts in the defensive zone. That would be stupid. So that's not going to happen. So someone has to do that. By default, that becomes Alex Newhook. For now, Owen Beck, and let's say the Alex Newhook, Bolduc line, and whoever is with them on the other side. But considering that's the dynamic that's likely to happen, it makes that much more sense that Beck is that guy right now because he fits that profile.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to note that on Wednesday, I think it was you who asked a question to Marty about Newhook, the need to sit down with him and redefine his role a little bit. When you mentioned the fact that he might be handed more D-zone starts and D-zone draws, even as a guy who struggles with the in the dot, but just in terms of responsibilities, uh, will be encouraged to really focus on the defensive aspect. Because the fact that the minute that he retrieves the puck and starts handling it, I mean, he could carry the puck and exit the zone easily. That won't be a problem with him. But just the focus on defense, if he can, master that aspect of the game with responsible line mates next to him, that could do a world of wonders to the Canadiens. So, but just closing on Beck, I think that, I mean, we're discussing out of one on ice training session. There's a lot of hockey to be played until October 8th, and there's no shortage of candidates also to fill that spot. So it's probably going to be one of the most interesting battles in camp.
Well, yeah, and I do think ultimately I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Kapanen get some reps in that spot, and that's a battle that's developing, and it's we've been talking about the Beck Kapanen dynamic forever since the playoffs last year in the AHL. How these are two guys who clearly appear to be battling for the same job in the NHL at some point. Well, it seems like at some point is right now. It's like it's really come to that. So it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and the guy for whom it might be a bit more difficult is Samuel Blais, because he admitted that in the 23-24 season, at the end, he was not playing a lot with St. Louis, a team where before in his first stint over there, he had a lot of success. So the same management who reacquired him were in love with him the first time, but they moved him to the Rangers because they had the opportunity to trade for Pavel Buchnevich, which is still to this day a puzzling trade. But
yes. But from the Rangers' point of view, yes.
Yeah. So and last year he spent a whole year in the AHL. So now he could go back to the AHL, and nobody would blink an eye around the league. It's like, oh my God, what did they do? Look who's on waivers. It's a guy who played in the AHL last year. And if it's a guy who's a dog on a bone, is a guy who stands out with his intensity, with his physicality, and you, at some point in the season, if the team starts strong with, the right level of determination and they're playing hard, they're good to go. But if at some point there's a letdown, it's always useful to have a guy who's got a chip on his shoulder, something to prove, who's eager to come back in the NHL, and who's for sure going to bring this card into his game and probably drive the intensity of the rest of the group up just by his style of play. So it could be an interesting card to keep instead of simply having him as a 13 forward, to have him down in Laval and say, you know what, at some point we need a spark and we're going to get him, because we know that this guy, for that particular element that we're lacking right now, we know that Samuel Blais is going to bring it to us.
The other thing I would mention is that this is another area where trading Carey Price's contract comes into play, because they do have some wiggle room on the cap. There's no clear eighth defenseman in camp. Like, if they were to choose to keep two extra defensemen, there's no one I can think of that makes any sense to keep as an eighth defenseman. Whereas if they chose to, and they were worried about losing someone on waivers for whatever reason, they could keep Veleno and Blais as extra forwards. It's not, I guess they could have under LTIR too, but it's just like, it's I mean, they literally kept Caden Primo as a third goaltender for months, right? Until Jake Allen got traded. And so this could be an instance where they keep both Veleno and Blais as their extra forwards and just carry them all year.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
That's possible.
Yeah. Like, they don't have to. I don't see an eighth defenseman that would be worth keeping.
No.
No. That person doesn't exist. But whereas in this case,
Mark Del Gaizo.
Mark Del Gaizo, interestingly, was paired with David Reinbacher during their practice. But yeah, it's like it just seems to me like They
Yeah,
could
but think back to
they could
last
keep
year.
Veleno and keep Blais.
Yeah, but think back to last year as a 13 forward, the number of times that Pez was scratched and he could not get in the lineup. You know, he was
Well, they
waiting
had
for
no
guys.
injuries.
That's it. That's okay. But Laval is right there. You got injuries. You call some guys up. At some point, carrying 2 extra forwards, if you trust your 12, and you're good to go with your 12, having 1 extra forward is fine. Carrying 2 extras, to me, it serves no purpose really.
Well,
Unless you're really concerned of losing him, losing a guy like Samuel Blais on waivers. Okay, fine. But
they were worried about losing Pez on waivers.
yeah,
this organization worries about losing guys on waivers. They were convinced that Kaiden Primo was going to be lost on waivers, and maybe they were right. We'll never know. But the reason why Pez stuck around, even though he couldn't get in the lineup, is because they didn't think he'd get through waivers. And so, and to be fair, like Ken Hughes lives with a phone on his ear. Like he is constantly making calls around the league, and so he generally, and not only that, but has a relationship with a lot of agents, and so he is a bit of a clearinghouse of NHL information. Like he's very plugged in to what's going on, and so if he catches wind of a team's interest in player X, he's going to take that as gospel, and he'll act in kind, and nothing bothers him more than losing something for nothing, right? And so I don't know. I think these are both guys that if they play the Pez role and have trouble getting in the lineup, that means something's gone well. That means the team is playing well and they're injury free and everything's going okay. But this is what they were signed for, to be insurance policies. And it wouldn't be the end of the world if you put Blais on waivers and you lose him. Is it earth shattering? No, it's not that. But they signed him for a reason. Veleno, same deal. Left shot centerman. Low risk, low contract, prior relationship with Ken Hughes. Ken Hughes used to represent him. There's and obviously we talked to him for a long time. He's a guy who's looking to resurrect his career and redefine himself as an NHL player. It's a pretty good risk to take. It's very low risk. But I don't see any reason. It doesn't devastate Laval to keep them. And in fact, it helps ensure that some of your younger players in Laval get prominent roles that are not taken by these guys. And they're guys that are just good insurance. And if they're just practicing with the team and traveling with the team, and it doesn't hurt anything. It's anyhow, it's just a possibility, right? That it doesn't have to be Veleno or Blais. It could be both.
So in regards to Blais' physicality, the team's physicality as a whole, it was interesting on Thursday to hear Kaiden Guhle saying that he was well aware that the whole Canadiens decor needed to play harder this year. And it's something also that it clearly in his mind starts with him. It's a component that he seems to be eager to demonstrate. He says that he's added more meat and more muscle. So he's, it's
9 pounds ultimately.
That's good. He
said he weighed in at 211, and on the official Canadiens training camp roster, he's listed at 202. So,
okay, that's good. That's very good because he was still considering his size, considering his style of play, and what he wishes the style that he wishes to practice. He was still a bit small. There was room for more. And there will still be room for more, I guess, for the next 2-3 years to add on. But I'm very happy that he added some muscle there. And to me, he's one of the most interesting players on this team for this upcoming season. I'm really excited to see, a healthy Guhle, a Guhle who's eager to take more of a leadership role. We're wondering, well, now with Savard retiring, who's going to pick up the slack in terms of the leadership? He intends to be more vocal. And to me, I don't necessarily see veterans like Carrier or Matheson changing who they are in order to fill a role that is not naturally theirs. Whereas Guhle, even though he's younger, it's more spontaneously in his DNA to try to take over, light up the room, being vocal, and you know, taking his place in this locker room in a more significant manner. So that's a part of his game that I'm looking forward to see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing a more physical, borderline violent version of him that he displayed quite regularly in junior, and which is a big reason why he went in the first round of the 2020 draft as high as he did, because he had that combination of mobility and physicality, and he's been very prudent and he's been very deliberate about how he's going to introduce that into his game at the NHL level. He did not. He needed to make sure he fully understood the speed of the game, the rhythm of the game, the pace of the game, the patterns of the game. And I think towards the end of after he came back from that injury, oddly, we started to see it more often, which is weird because you would think you'd be a little bit more cautious coming back from that nasty injury. But yeah, and talking about wanting to play a full season, how it's really wearing on him, and he rightly pointed out, and it's true, that last year he had no structural injuries. He didn't, nothing broke, nothing like he didn't pop a shoulder, he didn't hurt a knee, he didn't. It was a fluke injury, it was a cut. He didn't. His body held up, so that's a good sign. And I think the pairings today or yesterday today we're recording on Thursday. Sorry, the pairings today were also interesting in my eyes, and Matheson, Dobson. As I mentioned, I watched a lot of tape on Dobson, and the puck moving ability is truly exceptional. Like he gets the puck, he looks up, he sees a target, he hits his man. It's gone. It's off his stick. It's in the forward's hands, and they're going up. And it does it over and over and over again. And he does it in a very good way. Matheson's different. Matheson does it with his feet, largely. And not to say Dobson has excellent feet too. The one thing that came up often watching the tape on Dobson is he tended to have moments where he just lost his man and he just kind of had a lapse in the defensive zone.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the last
I mentioned that in the last episode. So these were not like moments of bad judgment. These seemed more like moments of like little legitimate lapses or just brain farts, if you will, or just zoning out for a second. Whereas Matheson has a tendency to just make bad judgment calls with the puck and sometimes takes undue risk for no real reward, right? And so these are the elements of frustration that these guys sometimes elicit, and they seem to take in Dobson. It's very. I found the reaction to Islanders fans on Dobson to be very similar to the reaction of a lot of Canadiens fans about Matheson. Like where he does so much good, but these errors somehow overwhelm all the good that Dobson was doing on Long Island and in Montreal. All the good that Matheson does in his 25 minutes a night. Like there's so much more good than bad. But the bad often took precedent on the good. So since both of these guys have this as their kind of identity, obviously Guhle and Hudson was the other pairing, but I found it interesting that these two guys were put together because I thought because they each have an element of this, that maybe they would be separated. But as it stands, that is a highly, highly, highly mobile defense pairing. Mobile, defensively sound, despite what I just said, the vast majority of the time, they're going to play really good defense. Dobson's good defensively. Like he really is. He's not physical, but he's annoying. Like he's always there. He has so much wingspan and his stick is always there. It's very active and it's often getting in the way of offensive players trying to play offense. So that's going to be a really interesting pair to watch. And the other thing, well, go ahead. Sorry.
But what is? Do you remember last year? Martin St. Louis was mentioning how he was hoping that Matheson was pick his spots better when
he did say that.
Choosing to carry the puck deep at certain times, but pick his spots better. Mm-hmm. But if he's paired with Dobson, to a certain extent, he's going to be forced to be like the protector in the back, being the guy who's the well, I guess they'll take turns, but being like the security blanket, because of his feet and because of the fact that there's no man that he cannot catch up with, if something's goes awry. So uh, it's if he was paired, let's say, with Guhle, he could feel as though, oh well, on that, well, it's not going to happen, obviously, two lefties, but just
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of the example,
Or with
I,
Hudson, yeah.
yeah, or even with Hudson, you're right. But they took turns. But even then, I feel as though he connected with his defensive side when he's been paired with an offensive defenseman, and I don't think
Yeah.
that it's not something necessarily that's been the case throughout his career.
I agree with you, and yes, that's possible. I mean, Dobson's the type, whereas Matheson will like crank it up in his own end and take off. Dobson's the type that really does identify moments where he can like pick a pass off and join the rush, or be the third man on the rush, or he appeared to just pick like seek opportunities that sort of present themselves spontaneously. Whereas Matheson, sometimes you got the sense like even as he was going back to get a puck, he's already decided I'm going to get this puck and I'm going to rush it up the ice, no matter what's in front of me. Now I'm feeling now's the time I got to put my stamp on this game. I'm going to go do that. But yeah, so yeah, I thought they would go with Matheson Hudson actually, and Guhle Dobson, because the one thing with Guhle and Hudson is you want Guhle playing against the other team's top lines, right? Um, you also want Hudson playing behind your top line. That combination of Hudson with the Suzuki line is the nuclear option for the Canadiens, and more often than not, that's probably what we're going to see. So it's going to put Hudson in a lot of challenging defensive situations, right? Playing against some top players, and Marty has a lot of confidence in Hudson's defensive ability, even though the rest of the hockey world doesn't. He does, and I think justifiably that he's a better defender that he gets credit for publicly, and I think it's going to take him some time to prove that, but I think over time he will. Um, and so that's part of the dynamic that I thought if you played Hudson with Matheson, it's easier defensively to justify playing Guhle and Dobson
Yeah.
against the opposing team's top lines. And so I think it's a big vote of confidence for Hudson that Marty wants to start this. Well, let's see. And Guhle did not deny that. He said it's not set in stone, but he was really talking as if he's going to play with Hudson this season. So, so I think that's a big vote of confidence for Marty for Lane Hudson, because that he was doing that towards the end of the season anyway, playing against other teams' top lines, and Marty did not shelter him at all. But if he's playing with Kaiden Guhle, that means it's going to be tough defensive assignments every night. That's going to be Hudson's reality, and there's no reason to believe he can't do that. But he's going to be scrutinized on that, and it does put him in difficult, challenging situations defensively. Which he should see that as an opportunity to prove a lot of people wrong about his defensive game.
But whether it's Dobson or Hudson, it's it's so obvious the importance of Guhle on this team.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the type of hockey that he plays in a field of offensive minded puck moving defensemen on the
Yeah.
top four. His role is crucial. So
Yes.
he better stay healthy.
Yes, he should. He better stay healthy. And then, whatever that third pairing winds up being, if it's Jack Carrier or if it's Struble Carrier, the fact that Carrier is on the third pair also makes this defense better. It's like he was shoehorned into a top four role last year. The arrival of Dobson pushes him back into a more appropriate, and the departure of Savard, frankly, he takes the Savard role. And that's an upgrade. It's a different type of defenseman, but similar in the sense that he defends really well and is a defensive minded defenseman. And obviously is not as big as Savard, but moves much, much better than Savard did. And so mobility is really the defining characteristic of this blue line. But for a long time, at least I've been saying, I think we've been saying that, when this team is good, their strength will be that blue line. And David Reinbacher's not even there yet.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, to me, that blue line 1 to 6, I mean, I would put it up against most blue lines in the NHL, and I think it stacks up pretty well.
For
Maybe
sure.
the top end guys on other teams are better, yes, but 1 to 6, Montreal's up there. It's
Yeah.
not. It's a top 10 defense in the league, probably.
And having Carrier on the third pairing, it shows how good you've become.
Yeah, and
That's
if
we
Jack
used to
takes that
say.
step,
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But we used to say that the Canadians would be a good team when their blue line is good, but we did not account for the acquisition of Noah Dobson
no,
and all
we
that.
did
So
not. No, David Reinbacher was supposed to be their Noah Dobson. that's
yeah,
that's that's what he was supposed to be, and now they might have Dobson. Well, they probably will at some point have Dobson and Reinbacher. They don't. He
yeah,
doesn't need to be their Noah Dobson. He could be their David Reinbacher because they have Noah Dobson.
it's always better like that. You
It
don't need
works
to.
out. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. You just need to be Arpin Basu, by the way. Yeah,
that's all I try to do. Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes I'm too much Arpin Basu. I can stand to be less Arpin Basu sometimes. I can stand.
All right. Well, your shrink is online too.
Yes.
Okay, we promised that we would discuss Martin St. Louis' approach to this training camp because last year it was a bit of a fiasco. The team started not feeling totally prepared, even though they tried to keep on a brave face and say that everything was good. You could tell just by the way preseason games had gone that the repetitions were not there. Martin St. Louis was very honest with the fact that he coached in preseason being a bit too sensitive to the sort of opposition he would get on the other side. Obviously, the bit of trauma with seeing Reinbacher and Laine getting injured right off the bat. And he didn't want other key players to fall to injuries during preseason. And it turned out that he didn't send his best players playing against Ottawa, and they needed those reps. They needed to be ready for the season. So I guess when I see scrimmage in the first day of on ice practice, it's like there might be only 6 preseason games, but we're going to try to simulate games and try to find the chemistry, create opportunities to create chemistry as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and so that even it won't depend on the decisions basically from the other team's coach on what sort of lineup am I bringing on the next to last preseason game, for example. So that's
Well,
I like that approach.
well, I mean, I think you're putting it a little lightly. What Martin St. Louis said. He said he takes responsibility for the Canadiens' slow start because of how he managed training camp last year. We're speaking of admissions of guilt. Kirby Dach admitting Patrick Laine wasn't really an admission of guilt. It was just an admission that that he was physically unable to perform last year. And Marty, who frankly never really admits he's wrong, right? I mean, it takes a lot for him to admit he was wrong. Admits, this was poorly handled by him, and that he owned their start being as bad as it was because, and credit to Eric Engels is a very good question. He asked, do you think there was some relation between the way training camp went last year and your start to the season? And Marty owned it, and I think deserves a lot of credit for that. It took, and I'm actually curious, and I would imagine he told his team that to some extent, because it was like and if he hasn't, he probably will, because it was really, he really, really took responsibility for it. And at the time, after the last preseason game in Ottawa, I went to that preseason game thinking that we would see the NHL rosters, and this was the final tune-up for the season, which we did not see. They did not dress Stützle, Tkachuk, all their top guys. Canadians did not dress all their top guys. Kent Hughes was talking to Steve Staios before the game, trying to set the parameters and the ground rules for who's going to play and who's this and who's that. And Staios is like, well, we're not playing any of our top forwards. And so then Hughes was like, well, we're not playing our guys. It was my headline to that story was absurd preseason game provides few answers to Canadians and Senators, because it was absurd. It was just a total waste. It was a waste of everyone's time. And so that's what makes it so funny, because Martin St. Louis said, I really hope in the last 2 preseason games this year, we can go with our NHL group. And who are they playing in their last 2 preseason games? The Ottawa Senators. And so hopefully both sides, because they're both equally guilty for this whole situation. I'm sure one side would blame the other and the other side would blame the other. They both botched this whole thing. Hopefully they both understand how ridiculous last year was and how they got, Jacky had to fight because he went after Stützle and this and that. It was just like, and Jacky did go after Stützle. And in a preseason game, going after the other team's best player the way he did is a bit taboo. You don't really do that. Everyone understands it's preseason, especially the NHL guys should understand this is preseason. No one wants to see anyone get hurt. It's kind of understandable when a Cedric Paré is doing it. He's trying to break into the NHL. He's trying to get noticed. It makes sense. Arber Xhekaj is also trying to establish himself in the NHL, but he's an NHL player. You don't go after the other team's top player in a preseason game. And that just it was, but that was a reaction to something else that I don't even remember. Anyhow. All that to say, Martin St. Louis making a public plea on the first day of training camp that hopefully I could play my NHL guys in the last 2 games. But he also said it's going to depend on what the other side does.
Yeah.
He did not commit to ignoring what the Senators do and just playing his guys no matter what. So let's hope cooler heads prevail. Let's hope everyone is smart about it. These are all, by and large, intelligent human beings who should be able to sit down and say, hey, listen, our guys need the reps. Let's just play our guys and let's get through the preseason injury free and let's go start and let's go play the season, because it's a very important season for both these clubs. They both have aspirations. They both broke through into the playoffs last year for the first time in a while. They both hope to go further this year. It would be unfortunate.
Yeah, but that rivalry is going to ramp up this year just because of their rivalry in the standings. They're the best. Yeah. It's the first time that they're good at the same time for over a decade.
Yeah. And the last time they met in the playoffs, that was a bloody Gallagher, I guess, would have been the only player to have played in that series. But, Lars Eller lying on the ice, first blood on the front page of the Ottawa Sun, which is just first class Ottawa Sun front page. But Eric Greiba, kind of threatening guys and then going out and knocking people's heads off. But anyhow, I thought that was, honestly, in back-to-back days, we had Marty St. Louis taking responsibility for their poor start last year, Kirby Dach taking responsibility for his poor start last year, and then Patrik Laine is not in the same category. But that's that's in 2 straight days we had guys coming out and being like, yeah, last year was my bad.
Yeah. But the whole approach to camp also, apart from what's going to happen at the end of camp, there's also the fact that there's been such a focus on, we talked in previous episode about getting off to a good start to the season. And we talked about how the guys had spent the summer in Montreal. There were so many guys, et cetera, et cetera. Well, back in Martin St. Louis' playing days, guys of his generation went from, when I started my career, we used training camp to get in shape. And now we have to arrive in training camp and be in shape. Well, the message that stands and that is given today, we're not there anymore. It's not that you have to ramp things up during preseason in order to be ready for game 1. It's arrive with the attitude that on day 1 of preseason, you're ready to go ahead and give it your all. So it's not cruising along, like Plecky used to do, or Rowan Hammerlick, who always conveniently invented himself an injury during preseason that miraculously healed.
It was invariably a groin. Yeah,
that's it, and magically healed on the eve of the opening night. But no, the message is, guys, you have to be ready right from the get-go. And I think that for a team who's eager to have a good start to the season, have that mentality of saying, we're ready to go. He wants them hungry, and that's the way it should be. And there are a tons of differences between Martin St. Louis and John Tortorella. He says that he inspires himself a lot from Tortorella, but for me, even though the application might be different, but I feel like listening to him talk about the beginning of training camp, I thought there's a lot of the John Tortorella mentality of making sure that my guys are in shape, because that's another question. It was just not Dach last year. There were a few guys that management thought they were not necessarily in their best shape to start the season.
Slav being another one.
So now let's make sure that everybody's serious, everybody's in shape, and everybody's ready to go, because this means something. This is not just we're biding our time until October 8th.
No, and we saw two things on day one that proved this. There were conditioning skates after the scrimmage. One of the teams, the red team, I guess that's Suzuki's team, stayed on the ice and did laps after a scrimmage, which I thought was significant. The group that only practiced, there were two things that I found pretty telling: the conditioning and how, but it was also, there was system work being done. They were doing puck retrievals. There was specific game situations that were being worked on. It was system work right on day one with 60 guys. It's like a lot of them are going to go play in Laval, and a lot of them are going to apply these same principles in Laval. So it's not like it's a waste of time, but there was pretty detailed system work being done right on day one. And, when Marty was asked about the defensive zone play, which was such an issue at the start of last season, and really produced the most combative Martin St. Louis press conference we've had since he was hired, which was him being challenged by a few reporters on the hybrid defensive zone system, because it was clearly not working. It was obvious, and he got really huffy about it. When he was asked about it on Wednesday, he's like, yeah, it's not going to change a whole lot, because he did make adjustments at that point last season, and the adjustments basically simplified the defensive zone, and they started playing much better after that. He said there won't be much changes, but there will be some, and we're going to attack it early. And we didn't really see that on day one, the defensive zone stuff specifically, but there was definitely system work being done on day one, which, I think it speaks to the urgency of training camp, that they're going to take advantage of every day to prepare for that first game. And they're not going to spend a whole day on conditioning, because that's not an optimal use of their time. There's stuff that needs to be done for them to be ready to play. And the system work is important. It's part of that. So it'll be interesting to see how he incorporates that stuff. I remember last year in training camp, they didn't do any special teams, not on the ice. They did all their special teams on video. Yeah. Not a single on-ice session where the power play worked against a penalty killing unit. And he was weird. It was curious. I remember
very weird
when Guy Boucher first went to the Leafs. And so the Canadiens had the opener in Toronto that year, and Sheldon Keefe was talking about how Guy Boucher spent time in training camp on 6-on-5 situations. So they can do 6-on-5 in training camp, and you can go through a whole training camp and not do a single day on the ice, on the power play, on 5-on-4. It was odd. I don't think we're going to see that this training camp.
No,
I think that was
something tells me.
That was one omission that Martin St. Louis, I don't think will allow to happen again, especially with all the options he has on the power play this year. God knows what the power play units are going to look like, but man, it's Patrick Laine. Interestingly, he said he's never had a situation where there were two balanced power play units on his team, where two units were competing against each other for ice time. And he was like quite eager to see how they're going to run it, but he's like, it'd be good. It'd be good if we had competing power play units, and whoever's going better should play more. I'm all for it. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if Laine was on that second unit. I don't think he was thinking that when he said that today, but
probably not.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least if he was on that second unit opposite Bodzik, and that could be a lethal, either Bodzik on the right circle or where he played in St. Louis in that bumper. Either way, that could be a lethal shooting combination. Like, honestly, like very, 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 with Dobson, potentially with Dobson up top. That's three legit power play one guys that you would have on your power play two.
Yeah. But just to finish on that, because you said that the system work on day one speaks of the urgency. It also speaks of the fact that this is a coach who's in his fourth year coaching this team, and he's been coaching roughly the same group of guys who is maturing and getting older with him as a coach. So that's also the luxury of saying, well, we're picking up where we left off, and we don't have to start from scratch anymore. You know what I'm about. I know what you can do. Here's what we're going to work on. And it might be day one of camp, but it's certainly not day one of our mutual history. So let's focus on certain details right away, because that familiarity between the coach and his teams, at some point, it's bound to pay off. And I think that's where you can make up ground and get even one step ahead, just by the fact that there's such a good understanding between the coaching staff and the players.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I wonder, when he said that on Wednesday about owning and taking responsibility for the Canadiens' slow start, like, he must feel an enormous amount of pressure to run an efficient training camp this year. If that's how he feels about last year's training camp, and that it was basically his fault that it went off, he said derailed, so basically that it went off the rails. He's got to be feeling, maybe pressure is the wrong word, because I don't think Martin St. Louis feels pressure, or a responsibility and a burden to some extent to make sure that this training camp runs much smoother and is a very efficient and effective preparation for his team to start the season. By him saying, that's the other thing that I found admirable of him saying that, is by him saying that, he's upped the scrutiny on their start to the season. It's on him to make sure the start is better. If he's taking ownership for the reason the start was bad last year, it takes some of the responsibility for that off of his players, which is what good coaches do. But B, it creates a certain amount of pressure on him to run a camp that makes it so that they enter the season and they don't have to have a fantastic start. They just have to not have a terrible start. if I don't know, if they're like 3-3 after 6 games, not the best, not the worst. They're still in it, but I think he put pressure on himself by coming out publicly and saying that to make sure that this camp goes smoothly. So
Martin St. Louis is all about getting better. He was like that as a player, and now as a coach, he must have looked and say, okay, where are the areas where I can get better? He looked at training camp and said, this is one place where I can get better.
Yeah. Exactly. So and honestly, day one looked good to me. I mean, it's pretty big. Like, when the group is this big, it's hard to judge. Training camps are all more or less the same. I mean, yes, he's scrimmaging every day, which is a bit of a change, and he did do the system work, he did the conditioning work. But when Laval Rocket Camp starts at the end of the month, that's when we're really going to get the nitty gritty training camp stuff. There'll be a week where Martin can work with his team that's going to be in the NHL, and that's where I think we're going to see, if any changes are made. But I think that's going to be the period of time that I'm watching closest, to see how he reacts and to see what decisions he makes in terms of what they do in practice and how they practice and how often they practice and all those things. That's really the period where I'm going to dial in on that. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Laval Rocket Camp starts on the 30th.
Yeah, the
September.
Day. Yeah, it's not coincidentally. That's when the Canadiens are leaving for Quebec City. They're going to play that night. Then they're going to have their semi-retreat in the Quebec City region with pretty much their NHL roster. Maybe that there are going to be 2 or 3 more cuts to do, but by and large, it'll be their NHL team. So that's convenient that they separate the group at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll be the point where it'll be really interesting to see how he approaches that.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, everybody, for listening or watching the Basu and Godin Notebook. We're going to be back on Monday with our subscriber episode. If you are not a subscriber to our podcast and you wish to become one, you can go to BasuandGodin.com. It's on Substack. And we've got different plans, so you can subscribe monthly or have an annual plan. If you listen to us on Apple Podcast, you can give us a 5-star rating or write a little comment. It's always appreciated. Makes it easier also for new people to discover us. And enjoy the weekend and the Canadiens practices in Brossard, and we'll be there, Arpin and I. So take care, everybody.